Welcome back to another MOTOBOB video, and this week Royal-Enfield just announced a very cool looking new bike that's based upon their Himalayan platform. It's a more street and city focused spec with some bold new paint jobs, and they've called it the Scram 411. Certainly looks like a fun bike, and so in this video we'll go over all of the details with 9 things that you need to know about it. First up, this bike uses the same LS410 engine as the Himalayan, so it's a 411cc fuel injected 4-stroke single overhead cam air-cooled single cylinder that makes a peak power of 24.3 horses at 6,500 RPM and a peak torque of 32 Newton meters at about 4,500 RPM. And look, it's not a massive amount of performance, but Enfield typically values simplicity, practicality, and serviceability over revvy thrills. It's also pretty efficient on fuel, so they quote 3.18 litres per 100 kilometers, which is about 90 miles per UK gallon. By the way, a lot of people ask why I quote metric figures on this channel. That's because my US and UK audience are roughly the same size, and gallons are different in each country. So this bike would be 88.9 in the UK and then 73.9 miles per gallon in the US. So it's just easier to quote metric, and then you can go and convert it yourself if you wish. But the point is, either way, it's pretty good on fuel. So even a relatively modest 15-litre tank still gives you a range of 471 kilometers or 292 miles, at least at their official fuel consumption figures, which do tend to be a little optimistic from most manufacturers. Now with the chassis, the fundamentals are pretty much the same as the existing Himalayan. It gets the same steel cradle frame, but there are some little tweaks that make it a bit more appropriate for city riding. Now the big one would be the front wheel size. They've dropped it from 21 inches to 19. I've ridden the Himalayan quite a bit, and the front end does feel a little vague on the road, as you'd expect with any other bike with a 21-inch front. And to be honest, in the UK, on the road, I don't think you really need that big wheel size for rolling over rough surfaces, and so this is definitely a positive change, at least in my book. The 19-incher should make it feel much better on tarmac, and yet it still offers you a little bit of off-road ability if you do want to dabble on some easy gravel roads. Now it will also affect the geometry, so it'll drop the front a little, and there's also a little less travel in the fork, so 190mm to the 200 of the regular Himalayan. The shock remains the same at 180mm of travel on each, but I'd expect this bike to feel a little quicker to turn in. The only downside is that you do sacrifice a bit of ground clearance, so it sits at 200mm on this bike as opposed to the 220 of the Himalayan. Now this seems to be a bigger factor in purchasing decisions for Indian customers. India's the second biggest country in my audience, and it comes up a lot in the comments. So if you do live somewhere where the roads are a little bit on the rough side, then probably the base Himalayan is the right one to go for. Now thankfully you don't lose quite as much seat height. The existing bike sits at 800mm, which is already quite low for an adventure style bike, and so losing another 20mm wouldn't have given the Scram the right feel for me. So it's good news that it now sits at 795mm, so that's just 5mm lower, and I think that's just about right for most city riding on this sort of machine. I assume they've done it with a little bit more padding in the seat, so even though the rest of the bike drops a bit, the seat height doesn't, and again I think that's a really good thing because I found the regular Himalayan to be a bit thin on the seat pad in front. Enfield say that the new single seat that reflects the urban styling of the motorcycle offers great comfort for both rider and pillion in long city commutes, as well as taking the road less travelled. Another big positive is that you lose a bit of weight, in fact quite a lot of weight. The OG Himalayan comes in at 199 kilograms curb, which isn't massive, but with just 24.3 horsepower on tap, the lighter the better really to boost up the power to weight. But the new Scram 411, it tips the scales at just 185 kilograms, so that's a good 14 kilograms saving. No word from the press release on how it's been achieved, but just looking at the bike you can see there's less bodywork, so no fly screen or the high mounted mudguard, and you also don't get that metal frame around the cockpit, and there's also the smaller front wheels, so all of those could be factors. Now I guess that drop in weight will also help a little with the braking performance, because although you've got the same 300mm front disc with a 2-pot caliper, the same 240mm disc at the rear with a single pot, and the same dual ABS system, you'll have less heft to haul up. In terms of the cockpit, it's also pretty much the same deal, so the part digital, part analog dash that gives you all the basics, including a trip meter, time, fuel gauge, and service reminder. But then you also get their Tripper navigation pod, which is a pretty sweet standard feature on a bike at this price point. It pairs with your phone over Bluetooth and it gives you turn-by-turn navigation prompts from the route you've planned in the Enfield app. Now, I tried it out for a couple of weeks on the Meteor 350 and I actually thought it was pretty good. Similar in a way to the Beeline Moto, who sponsor the channel, so definitely check that product out if you like the look of the Tripper pod but don't have an Enfield. But perhaps the most striking feature of this new bike is the paintwork. You've got some much bolder options than the standard Himalayan, which I guess they're hoping will play well with the more city-biased audience. So the lowest cost entry-level Scram 411s will come in graphite yellow, graphite red, and graphite blue, all with a gun grey fuel tank that gets some colourful tank badges and some matching rim tape. There's also a couple of more premium variants, so White Flame and Silver Spirit, and they get what they call dual tank colorways with unique and original graphics. Now, I quite like it. I think it looks fun and there are some nice details like the new headlight surround and the tuck and roll style cover on the seat. But as I always say, these things are somewhat subjective, so let me know which one you pick out of the Scram and the Himalayan down in the comments. So this was just the global announcement this week. The full European introduction is set for the end of April. That means bikes will be in dealers for sale and for demos at the start of May. And there's no word on price yet, but I wouldn't imagine it'll be too different to the £4,699 starting price of the gravel grey Himalayan base bike. As always, let me know what you think of it down in the comments below. I always enjoy reading your thoughts. And if you're new here and you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news right here on YouTube, then please do hit subscribe and I'll catch you in the next one.